For all of you, good afternoon. I'm Doug Jones, President of the Vancouver Island Chapter 19 of CARP, and I'm welcoming you to this hybrid chapter meeting. There are those of you who are present here in this room, wonderful conference room at Ocean Networks Canada, those who are listening simultaneously on the broadcast, and also those who will be watching later on the recording. So first, this is the March 13th meeting, officially going from 2 to 3, and we will try to stop on time at 3 o'clock. We acknowledge and respect the many First Nations of the island and the Canadian Gulf Islands of the Salish Sea, whose traditional territory CARP Vancouver Island Chapter 19 operates, and the peoples whose historical relationship with the land continue to this day. So a few housekeeping things. Just if you can type in your name and where you're located in the chat box and any questions you've got. You can also raise your hand because you should be able to speak at the end. But in the meanwhile, if you would turn off your mics, please, that'll help the bandwidth. And if you hold your questions till the end, I think that'll make it a little smoother as we keep going. And then if you do have some questions, which we do encourage, keep them brief so we can maximize the number of people who can be listening in as we're going through the meeting. It is being recorded and it will be available on YouTube about a week after the current meeting. And so we'll try to keep the meeting on time, and end at 3 o'clock. And I'm delighted to welcome Kate Moran, who's the President and CEO of Ocean Networks Canada, to provide some information on solid carbon. Kate is a professor of School of Ocean and Science, Earth and Ocean Sciences, a fellow of the Canadian Society of Senior Engineers, a fellow of the Canadian Geographic Society, a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and an officer of the Order of Canada. And if that isn't impressive enough, I'm also very impressed with the time that I've had to chat with Kate. She's a very warm person, very easy to talk to, very easy to listen to, and to hear her passion about all the activities going on at Ocean Networks Canada. She can speak for hours on any of the topics, and we've just kept this to one topic because of its relevance currently. With the current concern about greenhouse gases and climate change, there's evidence which is very obvious in this area between the droughts and the fires, and other things that have gone on that have caused us some concern. Here, for example, the heat dome a couple of years ago as well. So it's essential to reduce the production, and that's an immediate need. But even if the world production decreases, the current accumulation of greenhouse gases will continue for many years to come. And so mechanisms need to be put in place that can deal with reducing the current load as well. And the advancement in removal technologies will be a very important component, and that is the impetus for asking Kate to talk about this today. So please join me in welcoming Kate to talk about her components of the solid carbon as one way of stopping the accumulation that we've got so far. Thank you, Kate. I'm going to try to see if I can stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Doug. While you're stopping to share, I just want to say for people in the room here, if there is an alarm going off, we would exit out of this door right behind you and muster on the top parking lot. That has happened before in meetings in this room. If ground shaking happens because of earthquakes, these are solid tables. You just get underneath and hold on until ground shaking stops. And I think you know where the washrooms are, do you? Okay, good. And Jessica Scan is here. She's the Associate Director of Strategic Partnerships and Government Relations here at Ocean Networks Canada. I'm going to share my screen to start the presentation. Thank you for that kind introduction, Doug. Oops, I've got to stop because I've got my crayons up. I always use crayons when I'm using Keynote, sorry. Here we go. And can everyone see that? Great. Can everyone see that? Okay, terrific. I'll be talking about solid carbon, and I'm going to just give my acknowledgement. Doug just gave one, but for here in the room, we acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory we are presenting and listening, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationship with the land, and we always had the sea, continue to this day. And for those in the room, this carving that's on the image is here in the room, and it was done by a Coast Salish artist that came here to duplicate and put images in the carving that relate to what we do at Ocean Networks Canada. Luke Marston is the artist. I'll just start with this image that Carl Sagan, who many of you probably recall, he convinced NASA to turn the Voyager spacecraft around as it was leaving the solar system, and it did capture that dot, that blue dot that's now classic. And it's really just reminds us that the planet is really a great deal of ocean. And it may have been named wrong. Instead of Earth, and maybe it should be called ocean. I'll just touch on Ocean Networks Canada. What we are is we have monitoring systems that monitor all aspects of the ocean. This left block is the physical oceanography, the biological in the middle, our interaction with the continents, and of course, because we're here on the West Coast, we are keenly interested in understanding the seafloor and earthquakes and venting, hot vents and cold vents. And the public interest in these are related to earthquakes and tsunamis, of course, and underwater landslides. And we do research in all these areas, but also provide products to help keep the public safe. And I think you already heard about our earthquake early warning system at one of your previous meetings. So to monitor all these areas, there's a telecommunication cable that lands in Port Alberni. It's the Neptune Observatory. We have two other cables, one in Saanich Inlet and one in the Strait of Georgia. These are connected to nodes that provide power and internet connectivity to sensors that provide data in real time, 24/7. And these are all of the locations we have, which represent a wide variety of ocean environments. And because of the fact that we have these capabilities, we've now expanded them to coastal observatories along the BC coast, in the Arctic, and now we're working to expand that even further on the East Coast. So although most of our observing infrastructure on the West Coast, we also are growing to particularly put more observing in the Arctic, and many of these are with Indigenous communities. I don't expect you to read these bubbles, but these are really what we produce. We produce scientific data and then data products that are important for public interest, like earthquake early warning, tsunami alerting, and climate solutions, which I'll be talking about to you today, the Solid Carbon Project. So this is a feasibility study that we're just wrapping up. It represents, over 14 years, I would say, of research. And it's a little complicated, so I'll try to step through it for you. We started to work on it in 2008 with colleague at the Columbia University, Dave Goldberg. I won't go through each of these steps, but we have been working with others to try to understand if we can begin to take carbon dioxide and inject it into ocean basalt. And so there's a series of steps that have gone along where we had funding with the U.S. Department of Energy, with Mr. Goldberg, and now we recently had funding from the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions. And that's what I'm going to talk about here. We're at the end of this 4-year feasibility study, and I'll be stepping through what we've done in this solid carbon project. But just to leave you this message that we have been working on this for quite a long time. So we're not just starting this today. We have a lot of confidence in what we have already. In terms of the team, this is a more recent picture of me and Dave Goldberg. Karen Crawford is a mechanical engineering professor at University of Victoria. Terry Satterfield is a professor at University of British Columbia, who's a specialist in social science. And Romany Webb is from Columbia University, who's a specialist in regulatory frameworks and sort of how you actually move ahead with projects like this. It's a wide range of universities. We've grown to many, many, many people working on this. And I'm excited to say this was a picture of the room we're in now for those online. And what we know about is that there's a lot of young people in this picture. And what we're seeing is that there's keen interest in the youth, the graduate students and postdocs in being part of a project like this, because they see that it's their world that they'll be growing into, and it's wonderful. It would be wonderful for them to be part of something where they can be part of a solution. So this is a feasibility study that we have funding for, and it lays the groundwork for a demonstration offshore. So I'm going to describe these 3 areas that we've been working on: system engineering, demonstration, and public and regulatory acceptance. But let me start with the urgent need. Doug touched on it in the beginning. Of course, the surface air temperature has reached, these are over and above averages, have reached extremes recently. It's been the warmest calendar year going back to 1850. The average temperature is 0.17 above previous highs. It's 0.6 warmer than the 1991-2020 average. We're almost at the 1.5 degree C warming, and it's likely that the 12-month period we're in now will exceed what people think is a tipping point in terms of a 1.5 degree C increase above pre-industrial levels temperatures, average temperatures. And so, of course, what's the reason for this is because of greenhouse gas emissions, both carbon dioxide and methane emissions, which you know that well. And what's really important for us is that it's actually most of the heat that's been generated from global warming is actually been taken up by the ocean. 90% of the heat has been taken up by the ocean. And if we didn't have the ocean on the planet, we'd already be cooked. So we need to just thank our lucky stars we have an ocean planet. But I think what's happening now is the fact that when you look, the US does a really good job through their departments to put together the cost of these impacts. And so last year, these are the number of US billion-dollar climate events. There's quite a number of them, and this is happening globally. So the reality now is that it's costing us money. And we think that gives us optimism because we think that means that we'll be able to see investment in projects like solid carbon, because money does drive the world still. The urgent need, this is a graph, and on the x-axis goes from basically now until 2100. The 0 is the 0 of getting down to no more emissions. But in order to keep the planet habitable, we actually need to remove more CO2 out of the atmosphere than just stop emitting. And that's the light blue that starts at about 2030. We need to start removing CO2 from the atmosphere to keep the planet habitable for people and for biodiversity. So the gray area, what we have to do, we have to stop emitting. That's all the light gray. And in addition to that, we need to what some people call negative emissions. And I just got this today. This was calculations of the average temperatures in February that we just passed, and it is the 9th in a row hottest month ever recorded on the planet. So the indications are here. It's clear. There's no more need to dispute that. These are different kind of practices for getting CO2 out of the atmosphere: growing blue carbon, improved forest practices, including planting trees, agriculture practices where you're enhancing the carbon in soil, bioenergy with carbon capture. But if you add them all up, they still are not enough for what I just showed you in the previous graph. So that's what we're proposing, is to combine direct air capture of CO2 with carbon mineralization in the project called Solid Carbon, which we can then meet the needs we have for carbon removal. So I've already talked about this. There's an urgent need. The technology exists. I hope I can convince you of that. The mineralization part I'll talk about in a moment. And this project becomes the most suitable and durable solution for carbon removal. In this picture, you're seeing a direct air capture machine in Iceland. And there's 2 companies there, Climeworks and Carbon Fix. They've been working together to do 2 things: pull CO2 out of the atmosphere, take that carbon dioxide and inject it into basalt on Iceland. Iceland happens to be a piece of basalt that's above the sea level. And it's a small piece of ocean basalt, but they showed that within 2 years, this carbon dioxide becomes rock in itself. It's injected in the pore space in the rock, reacts with the rock, and then it never can go back into the atmosphere. That was proven at least 8 years ago now. They are now in industry. The reason that we are in this game is because most of the basalt is in the ocean. And so we want to demonstrate that we can do the same thing that did in Iceland in the ocean. And then we can actually remove a significant amount of CO2. This is a more recent picture of those two industries working together. The steam see there is geothermal energy, so it's not CO2, but they are actually, in addition to using existing point source CO2 in Iceland, they are also capturing CO2 from the atmosphere and injecting it into basalt. Up in the right, you see Prime Minister Trudeau. He visited this location in July, and we've talked to our global affairs people who work in Iceland, who told us that he was the one of the leaders who had the best questions and stayed there longest to learn more about this. And so we've been in touch with his office to remind him that, in fact, we even have a better solution right here in Canada. So hopefully he'll take us up on that. So this is a kind of a cartoon of the big concept, and those white bars in the middle are just showing you that this is really deep water. So it's the concept ultimately would be direct air capture, which is shown by that fan, powered by renewable energy, because we have a significant amount of wind. Most of the wind is in the ocean offshore, and then we would inject it, pump it through the water column, and inject it into subsea floor basalt. That's the ocean crust. And for those of you who were reading the news this week, we had some earthquakes that we were reporting on. I don't know if you read that story. Well, we're monitoring where new ocean crust is formed, and there was a whole bunch of earthquakes just last week that we were documenting how ocean crust is formed. It was very exciting. So that's basalt, and that basalt layer is all over the ocean basin. And so that's what we want to do. We want to combine these technologies, carbon capture, pump it through the water column below the seafloor, inject it into ocean basalt where it turns into rock. And so these are the two pieces. The on the right is what Solid Carbon Project has been working on. We have not been personally working on the capture of carbon dioxide because there's been a huge amount of venture capital investment in direct air capture of CO2. And just, I think it was a month ago, wasn't it, Jessica, where the Biden administration announced that they are investing $1.2 billion in direct air capture of CO2. The two sites that they're going to be testing on, one is in California, the other is in Louisiana, and both of them are based on startup companies from Canada in direct air capture. So we have, as a country, we have a lot of innovation that has already been developed to do this. So these are the combining these technologies, as I said, direct air capture. Renewable energy is really important because as an organization and all of the people working on this project do not want to take the hydropower we already have that's needed for decarbonization. We don't want to steal that away. We need to have our own renewable energy in this so that we allow the existing hydropower, renewable power used to decarbonize that gray area in the graph I showed you. We're using repurposing oil and gas technology. It already exists. CO2 injection system, mineralization I talked about already, and ocean monitoring, for which Ocean Networks Canada already has in place. So we actually have all these technologies. They're all proven. So the advantage of this is it converts CO2 to rock permanently. It's durable. It can be globally scalable, and it's truly a vast reservoir potential. So just to give you an idea, this is a cascaded basin, is located off of Vancouver Island. We estimate, based on our research, that we have about 15 years. We have capacity to store 15 years of global emissions. That's 750 gigatons. That is gigantic. And so just one basin alone has that much. We have our 2021 cost was high, $600 a ton. Our goal is to get it down to $100 a ton, and that will mostly be done as direct air capture advances technologically and volumetrically, which we know it will because of the big investments that are being made. I'm just going to skip through that one. So I'll talk about the first activity, which is the ultimate industry we want to start up. And it's really looking at, we have different ways that we can combine technologies. And Curran Crawford, professor of mechanical engineering, and his students and postdocs have looked at what can we do. Well, we can obviously, I showed you that picture in the beginning, a floating platform with direct air capture injecting CO2. We could also be having the direct air capture in shallow water and pipeline it to a deep water location. We could also capture on land and move it by ship to that location. So right now, his students are looking at modeling the techno-economic best approach. What's the technology that we can combine at the lowest cost? So that work is still ongoing. It looks like the platform in itself, I'll show you, can be the solution, and we're just going to assess whether it's it's cost effective. As I said, they're also working on combining the direct air capture onto floating wind platforms. So looking at really unique technology solutions. And they actually did a first analysis of the direct air capture combining with offshore wind, which is a solution that could happen. So you put those two pieces together and then move the CO2 to the deep water location. In terms of the wind power for removal, the power requirements are high, but they're not unreasonable in terms of their ability. And in terms of the prototypes that where the wind turbines are going, that will be significantly reduced in terms of the power requirement as Japan, China, other countries, and the United States, hopefully Canada will get in the game, where we have wind turbines that are really big machines at a level of about 22 megawatts a pop. This is the scalability part. One of Karen Crawford's students combined the basaltic basins close to the areas of high population and also in areas where there's high wind power. And as you can see where we are up here, oops, I put this back. See that there's red up here off our coast with the Cascadia Basin, but there's other places in the world. Just think about having 750 gigatons capacity just off our coast. That means there's more than enough globally to achieve all of the needs. So they're completing this techno-economic analysis for transporting CO2 from major ports to ocean basalt, and they're doing the economics of the maintenance as well as the building out of these systems. So just to give you an idea of existing technologies, if you look at oil extraction, this is an example of an oil production facility in the Gulf of Mexico called Stones. It's the Stones mooring system. It's in almost 3 kilometers of water, and it has the ability to stay on location with very low power. But it's actually taking oil out of the ground and then burning it. But the technology is quite good. And in addition to that, it has a system where it can disconnect from those lines to the seafloor should there be a hurricane and they have to move off location. But just to give you an idea of the scale of this, on the left is of the infrastructure that's needed beneath the seafloor for the Stones production facility. So you see it's going to at least 2 kilometers beneath the seafloor. It has lots of different what's called casing strings, very expensive and expensive to install. And what you see on the right is what we need for solid carbon, because the basalt is very shallow beneath the seafloor. So we need a very shallow amount of infrastructure beneath the seafloor. And so this is just a sonogram. If you know sonograms for looking at when someone is going to have a baby, this is the same kind of technology, but looking at the subsea floor. And the rough, if you look at the rough part on the bottom, that's the top of the basalt. And then you see layers above that, that's sediment above it. And this is the location just off our coast. And if you think about it, that's about 300 meters below seafloor. It's a very simple installation beneath the seafloor. So it just goes to demonstrate that much, much simpler than offshore oil and gas technology, but we can adapt it, but easily done off our coast. So the second category is planning for a demonstration at Cascadia Basin, which I don't think I showed a map of, which I should. But we have colleagues at the University of Calgary who have been modeling this work. And so they have actually done modeling and laboratory experiments with the basalt from our location to demonstrate that it is capable of turning into solid carbonate. So this is the demonstration location, Cascadia Basin. As you can see, it's on the Ocean Networks Canada telecommunication network. And that orange box is a node that has power and telecommunications there. And this is the best location globally because it's been studied for decades now, serendipitously. We also have boreholes there that already exist. We know the subsea floor rock. And it is the reason why early on in 2008 that Columbia University scientists contacted us. They identified this Canadian location as the best in the world. And that's why they wanted to partner with us. If you zoom into that location, we have extended cables with sensor systems that we can then monitor the seafloor. We can have systems in boreholes to monitor a demonstration injection. And we will see that in real time to the public and be quite open in terms of the monitoring. So we've completed monitoring research. We have existing sensors that are already there on the left. And I can answer questions about them if you like. We're going to also add additional sensor systems so that we can assess the efficacy of the injection and how fast that the CO2 is turning into rock at this location. And our demonstration options is really use a big drill ship, do the injection with that monitoring system I showed you. But we're also looking at combining basically robotic systems, which would be less expensive. You can see the injection well is on the left, the pipe on the left, and then there's monitoring cameras and monitoring systems connected to the Neptune node. There are Canadian companies that are already developing some of these robotic technologies. So we have really good ecosystem of innovative companies that are already interested in working with us on this robotic-based demonstration option. So we've already completed the pre-feasibility study with Columbia University. Now we're finishing the feasibility study that I've just described. And then our next step is to really plan and conduct a demonstration. In Iceland, once they finished the demonstration, they had big investment from industry. So that's our hope, is that we can actually have a demonstration, showcase that it can be injected, it becomes CO, becomes rock from the reaction with basalt, and then we could see a new industry startup right here off our coast. But one of the things we know from new technologies is that public perception can stop a project in its tracks. And so we have been active, and Jessica's been part of this group on the regulatory and government relations part. But we have a researcher at UBC, I introduced her earlier, to do research on public acceptance. And so that's been her work. And it's really all being very transparent about what we know, what we don't know, engaging the public, including Indigenous communities, to better understand what people know and what they're concerned about, so you can address them if possible. And so they did research by doing surveys, asking some questions that are listed on the right, which you can't see it, but it's really looking at different aspects of the technology, the platform, the direct air capture, injection, the reaction with basalt. They asked specific questions of the public on all of these. And what they really found was that there is obviously different levels of concern, and those are associated with, most of the concerns is with drilling into the seafloor to prepare for the injection. Of course, that's probably the most visible you can imagine. So we're going to continue to work on this engagement, because one of the things that Terry Satterfield has said when they do the overall concerns about this public acceptance is that they're really the detractors are concerned about the components, the seafloor components, and risks like leakages. Those are the detractors. The supporters are perceive it as an economically and climatically and ethically beneficial. So more research is that we need to do for all types of these new solutions to the climate crisis. But we have, in terms of the detractors, we've done a lot of research on demonstrating that the risks are quite low. And so we need to communicate that clearly and transparently for ensuring that we have acceptance. So that's the presentation of solid carbon. And I hope that I didn't get into too much of the weeds, Doug, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I specifically asked Kate to leave some time for Q&A because I think this is an area in which there isn't a lot of general knowledge out there. So I wanted to make sure there was time for people to ask questions. And those of you who are online, if you unmute yourself, we can probably hear you if you have a question to ask. So while you're thinking of questions, I was just going to ask Kate for a couple of explanations about, you mentioned Iceland has above ground basalt. Is there any place in Canada that we have above ground basalt?
Yes, there's basalt on most of the continents, and some of the basalt is just across the border, Washington and British Columbia. But most of the on-land basalt is old. And so you have to think of it this way. when the on-land basalt, for the most part, except for Iceland, and the reason Iceland's unique is because it's at a spreading center where it's very young basalt. Old basalt, the cracks are all filled. So you in order to use it, you'd have to frack it, which you know about fracking. It takes more energy and power. So it's really the ideal location is young basalt. That is, and young means less than 15 million years old. That's young.
Thank you. I appreciate that we're not that old.
Yeah, exactly.
For some of us. Okay. Is there anyone online who wants to ask a question before I ask around the room here? You know, so as I said, just unmute yourself and ask a question. We'll give you a chance. Okay, not seeing any so far. How about around the table? You have a question? Turn on the mic so that people can hear you. Just push the little button there.
Yeah, that's good. Just filter it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that presentation. I really enjoyed it. Very informative. And I think I probably and my friend here probably have too many questions. We don't want to monopolize your time. I think maybe I'll start with the Iceland project. We had heard some concerns about the Iceland project in that they had to use a lot of fresh water. Can you comment on that?
Yes, they did. That's wow. You've done your homework. They do, and they have quite a bit of fresh water in Iceland, of course. But the process that they're using, they're injecting the CO2 and dissolving it into water and injecting shallow in the basalt. What we're proposing is to take CO2 and move it to a temperature and a pressure where it's supercritical, no addition to water. So we would not be utilizing water in the injection process. When we do the demonstration, we'll likely have to do what's called, we may look at options of injecting water and then supercritical CO2 to see if that's more beneficial to the reaction. But we would use seawater that's sitting there as part of the circulation system in the ocean, not use any fresh water.
Okay.
I'm a little bit concerned because I hear often about the direct air capture, and yet I don't think that technology is as advanced as it needs to be to make this economically feasible. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, technically it's there. I mean, it's obviously it can work, but you're right. The economics of it now are expensive, and the volume is small right now. That's why the U.S. government, through the Department of Energy, has making these big investments to it basically increase the efficiency and the volume that can be captured. It's among all the technologies, has the best potential. I mean, I would say we also work on ocean-based carbon dioxide removal, like using natural processing in the ocean. There's they can contribute, but it's not nearly enough. So I think because of that we're seeing this big investment, not only from the government, but from industry. We'll see it's a new technology when you start investing in it, just like, what was it, 2008, the beginning of using solar. There were huge, costs associated with regulation and in terms of its efficiency. That cost of solar now is so much cheaper than even the cheapest of the fossil fuels. So I'm just being optimistic. I think that it will become volumetrically and economically viable.
Do you know if the technology for direct capture has progressed a lot? Because my understanding was that it wasn't that efficient. Like there weren't enough places on the ocean to put up these stations to capture enough CO2 to make it worthwhile.
Yeah, no, they're all on land right now. There's none in the ocean at the moment, but they are becoming more efficient. And the cost has been going down. So it's on the right track. It certainly. Let me put it this way. We're in trouble. So I would say that even if it costs a lot, we might have to do it. And the way the U.S. is situated in terms of the way I think the way it's very good at innovating is they invest in technology to make it as efficient as possible. And then the government uses the procurement tool to advance it. And then when that happens, you begin to get more and more industry investment. Most of the investment for the direct air capture has been private. So now with government jumping in, I'm just more optimistic. It's a small amount right now, for sure.
When I've mentioned this to some others, they've asked the question of, why does it have to be CO2? Can't you strip the oxygen off and just put the carbon in? You could spread it over to the land. It would, make the soil blacker and it might be better. But I think there's inefficiencies in trying to strip the oxygen off of the carbon dioxide, even though the carbon itself may be useful. And the carbon dioxide capture seems to be the best way to go.
Well, and I'm not an expert in this, so you have to get someone else to talk about it. But CO2 use is kind of what you're talking about, taking CO2 and make it into something else. I don't know if stripping CO2 is the right thing, but there are different solutions that are about use of CO2 and making it a product. That's also part of the solution, and I would not diss it at all. It's still a part, but it's not a giant part. But we need to use every tool we have.
Yes, my understanding was that the inefficiencies of trying to get the oxygen off was a major issue. It's very energy demanding to do that. And thinking of what you're trying to use, it's much easier to simply grab it, put it down, and let it get converted.
I should also say just about direct air capture. There is advancements. I mean, there's big investment in Canada on point source capture of CO2 at smokestacks, and that's advancing. And this location would be just ideal. We think in the interim, until direct air capture is volumetrically economically viable, that we also need to put someplace to put the point source capture of CO2. So might as well put it in a place where it will never come back into the atmosphere. Is our view.
Now, you mentioned everything was being done by Canada, and the United States. This is a worldwide program.
Mm-hmm.
So what other governments are involved?
So we have partnerships in that robotic piece. We have a partnership with Germany. So they are investing in this kind of solution as well. And so we may be using their robotic drill to actually drill the injection well. When I showed you the ship to do it all at once, we're also talking with Japan. Japan is interested. They have young basalt like we do. Most of the Pacific is quite young basalt, so they have a ship that is ideally suited to do the demonstration. So we'll be talking with them next week, I think. We've talked with them already. Their engineers actually did an engineering analysis of the use of their ship, which is called the Chikyu. So they're interested. I think those are the two major. The UK did some experiments early on. I know they're still interested. They did some injections into sediment in the shallow North Sea, but mostly now it's because of the investment in climate from the Inflation Reduction Act. There's a lot of momentum in the United States right now because of that investment. Did you want to add anything? Yeah. Okay.
Sure. From what I've seen, that most countries are looking at, if they're looking at the ocean, it's saline aquifers that they're putting this into. So not many are looking at actual ocean basalt. So it's definitely, this is what is unique about the solid carbon solution, is really looking at the basalt as the solution. Whereas saline aquifers, I don't know much about them, but maybe you could speak to that, Kate, the difference.
Well, it's salt layers. They're injecting them below salt layers that just form a nice seal to CO2.
I'm just interested because some of the pictures you showed was like an oil drill out in the ocean. Is there an opportunity because that is, they're being phased out, but are they reusable?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're thinking. I showed you that image of the stones technology. I mean, they're still producing oil, but that technology is reusable. And in a study we've been doing, we have been partnering with like Shell and BP and those oil companies. They themselves don't do the work.
Yes, we hear you, Roger. Hang on a second.
Wait, you, Mike's not on.
That was you coming in, Roger, but hang on a second. We're there.
Okay. Can you hear us, Roger? Maybe you can.
Yes, but my mic was left on inadvertently, sorry.
No, that's all right. So we've been engaged with oil and gas service companies, and they're very, I mean, they're seeing the writing on the wall that their business models have to, as you say, have to take a turn. And so they keep an eye on this, and we could certainly be, that's why there's a lot of optimism that we could be repurposing that technology for sure.
One of the other queries that has come up with some of my discussions with people is they equate some of this to fracking, where they're pumping things down into the structure and then you get problems with earthquakes after that.
Sure.
We're in a fairly active area. You're talking about putting this, what is basically a gas up here, hopefully solid down there. What is the potential? You mentioned leakage, which is a potential problem, but what's the problem? What's the potential for this actually causing other problems that we haven't talked about?
Well, that was the part of the public perception, that we have to get the word out about what we've done in the research. So in terms of, we're certainly not fracking. Let me start with an oil and gas reservoir. Oil and gas reservoirs typically, particularly in the deep ocean, are overpressured. I like to refer to the Beverly Hillbillies, because when Jed, somehow discovered oil in his backyard, it was a big, whatever, gusher. And that's because oil and gas, when it's sealed under cap rock, it's overpressured. The location we have here in the basalt, it's no overpressure. So we can inject it in relatively low pressures. And so because of the concern, the public concern, we did back of envelope calculations, and I was convinced we wouldn't be causing any earthquakes from injection. But we had a postdoc whose specialty is in fracking and earthquakes generated from fracking. She did a full analysis of our location, published a paper demonstrating that it's extremely, extremely, extremely low risk of causing any earthquake. So I think we need to make sure when there's concerns about it, we demonstrate that we're doing all these assessments of these risks. In terms of leakage, we have 300 meters of very low permeability. In the oil and gas sector, they call it cap rock. So in the time when the gas is reacting with basalt, it's sealed beneath this very impermeable layer. So that's another, and then we'd be monitoring in real time to ensure that it's happening.
Could you just explain that? You said the gas is reacting with basalt. I was wondering about that. Is it a chemical reaction? And so CO2 is reacting with what?
It's reacting with the rock in the basalt to form carbonates. So it's the carbon in the CO2 is reacting with different types of basalt. And I'm not the geochemist, but we have papers on it. I can send you from the University of Calgary of the actual mineral reactions. I don't think maybe it's in the slide. Hold on. And anyway,
And to pressurize the CO2 into the basalt, is the basalt slightly porous, or is it the cracks?
yeah,
Is it cracked or is it porous?
there's both. So there's pore spaces and cracks in the basalt. And the scientific ocean drilling community has been drilling boreholes in this location. We have samples of it. And there was actually a hydrogeology experiment that injected tracers in seawater into the formation. So we know the fluid flow rates, we know the porosity, there's good porosity. It's almost an ideal, luckily it's an ideal spot that we can begin to do this demonstration. Did I answer your question? I'm not sure. Okay.
It's interesting that if you've ever been to one of the lava fields, such as in Hawaii and places like that, where you see how the rock folds over and then it folds over itself, and there's this gap in between. And if you break up some of those pieces, they are very sponge-like. It's surprising how much it's a sponge in that basalt, especially as you said, it's new.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's where.
In your various studies, feasibility studies, has there been Do you have numbers for what the first pilot project would cost?
Yes. It would cost, we think it would cost $60,000. I mean, $60 million. Sorry, a zero. $60 million. Thank you, Jessica. $60 million.
And what's the projected cost from climate change that we're dealing with on an annual basis now? Because it's well into the billions.
And
if not
trillions,
billions,
yes.
right? By
Yeah.
comparison.
It's small. I mean, it's a small cost, 60 million. That's our estimate. We started off at 20, but after looking at all the details, it's 60 million.
Yeah, and maybe I could interject because we've been having conversations with various departments in government as well, and Natural Resources Canada, as well as NRC, the National Research Council, have both been working with us on solid carbon, looking at how they could in the future have almost like carbon hubs at the coastline. So where it's almost, if you think of it as like the carbon trash can at the coastline, where industry could put the CO2, and then the National Research Council is looking at how you do the transport out to this kind of location. So we've been working with those two departments on sort of the logistics side of things. And then we've been looking at Environment Climate Change Canada, they hold the London Protocol under their portfolio. And so what they're looking to do is actually advance the London Protocol. There's a Schedule 5 that has a whole list of what they call it dumping, which is a terrible word because that's not the way we think about what we're doing, but a list of what can be dumped in the ocean. And right now they're looking at adding carbon dioxide as one of those items in the list in order for these kinds of projects to move forward. And so while we've been working on this for over the last 8 years, we're also working on that policy piece with government to make sure that this kind of, when we are ready to do the full demonstration, which we hopefully get funded by the Canadian government, then they're right there at the right time with a policy that's advanced enough for us to do this.
In the funding area, you mentioned that Prime Minister Trudeau asked good questions and appeared interested, but we're in election years around the world, really. And I'm wondering how tenuous any promises might be. Do you have some support?
Yeah, we actually just had MP Joyce Murray visiting us last week. So for those of you who follow the politics, Joyce Murray used to be the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans Canada. She's an MP in Vancouver. And she was here on a different subject, on ocean noise. But at the very end, we plugged her with the solid carbon, because that's, of course, our number one priority. And she was really excited about it. And our ask to her was, can you please get this message to Minister Wilkinson, who is the Minister of Natural Resources Canada? And I actually just heard from her today to say she's going to be writing a letter to the minister saying this project needs to move forward, and here's why. So any minister or that we speak to about this gets quite excited. What we're noticing right now, though, is that there's a focus on doing land projects or land experiments right now, injecting CO2 into oil and gas reservoirs or those kinds of locations. So we need to shift that idea into what we're trying to pursue, which is in the ocean. They just came out with a carbon strategy. Canada just came out with a carbon strategy. And within that carbon strategy, they do talk about research in basalt in the ocean. So it's going to take a little bit of lobbying and pushing on our side, but there seems to be more of an appetite right now. As for the next political change, if there is one, we do know that Conservative government also has carbon capture utilization in their platform as well. So we're happy about that.
I think it's worthwhile to also mention that's something that the CARP is also very concerned about, is the issues of anything that deal with the climate change issue, and this is sort of part of that component, but it's also something that we should encourage everyone who's on either here or online or listening to this afterwards. That's something you should be pushing your local MPs about. I mean, this is a critical component of where we should be going, and it shouldn't be dependent on particular party, province, or local government. This is an issue that is dealing with the environment for all of us and the future, and we should be pushing for it.
I also think, just as you asked about the oil and gas service industry, British Columbia is really rich in high quality, high technical labor in terms of oil and gas. That's an industry that needs high tech, and we have a rich ecosystem of workers in the ocean that are also high tech. So, once a demonstration can be done, we could get investment. This could really be another industry. So you're then creating jobs. When you get to that stage, you're creating jobs. You're enabling a transition of workers from a carbon intensive industry to one where we're doing something that's different. And I think as the regulatory framework, as other countries develop policy around valuing removal of CO2, which is happening in the United States and California, that means there's a market. And so as that happens, we begin to see that by just doing this, even the demonstration, we can be getting revenue, perhaps not for the entire demonstration, but getting some revenue.
Now, do we have any other questions from anyone online? I'll just repeat that all you need to do is unmute yourself and then speak up with a question. If you have, we've had questions around the room, but no one online so far has come in. So I want to just make sure that there's an opportunity for any of you who want to ask a question. Well, seeing none back around the table, unless you have anything else you want to ask. I think we're pretty well covered. So I just want to kind of close this off by first thanking you, Kate, for all of the enlightening and in fact, it's encouraging information when a lot of what's coming down right now is fairly discouraging information. And thanks to you and Aaron and the rest of the staff here at Ocean Networks Canada for providing some of the refreshments we had, as well as this wonderful meeting room we're in, which I don't think many people recognize is even here. I think it's a unique opportunity for us, and so we really appreciate that. And to Brenda Harfield for helping out with the assistance for today's meeting and support as well. So this session has been recorded. I'm going to turn it off in a moment. It will be available, as I said, in about a week's time on YouTube. We'll send out the notice on our YouTube channel. And the YouTube recording will be on our Facebook page so that you can get it there. And also, you can use that source as well as the newsletters that come out regularly for our next meeting that's coming up on May the 22nd. And one of the issues there is the effect of climate change on your home insurance. And we have Matt Berthew, who's going to be talking on that topic, and that's his area of research at UVic as well, of interest, as well as working with the company. So keep an eye on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Vancouver Island, CARP Vancouver Island, CARP Vancouver Island. And other than that, enjoy your afternoon. And tk you again, Kate. It was delightful. Thank you.